Thank you, Joshua. Thanks so much for joining us. Glad to
Thanks for
be
having.
hosting you. So tell us a little bit of background about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Jeshua. I'm a entrepreneur, investor, traveler, lifelong learner or contrarian, you can say. So I was born and raised in Singapore, but I've spent the last 3 years traveling quite a bit. In fact, I've only been in Singapore for 4 months in the last 2 years. So yeah, my start in the industry sort of came rather unusually, right, in terms of technology and how I get exposed to this innovation scene and startups and everything. So I started by being in the media industry. Quite early on, I actually got exposed to all this sound filmmaking, photography as a volunteer in church. I was a very young volunteer at 10 years old. And then I dropped out of school at 16, 17 and went on to study filmmaking. So that was the first unconventional choice that really, I would say, is the spark for me to make many other unconventional choices down the road because it sort of worked out for me. Yeah, so I was working while schooling and then also doing a lot of stuff around um, kind of accidental innovations, right? So things like solving my own problems. So at the end of my third year in film school, I actually had a problem that I encountered, which was I gathered all this equipment, from filmmaking along the years, and then I realized that they were collecting dust when I wasn't using them. So I decided to put up a very simple Facebook page and say, you can come and rent it from my house. I'll charge you much lower than the shop does it, and I will rent it to you at any time of the day because as long as I'm at home, I can rent it to you. So along the way, some of my kind of like classmates or cohort and customers, they also wanted to be in on this, right? Because they saw it as a good way to make extra income. And that was the start of my first business called J Rental Center. We're still running today, and we have
And how
over.
old were you?
Sorry,
How old were
I
you
was
at
I
that
think
time?
19 or 20 at that time. So yeah, it was about 4 or 5 years into my journey as a filmmaker where I started accumulating all this equipment, right? And then I realized that it would just be collecting dust if I just did nothing with it. So yeah, I mean that 1 year into that, we had 16 people on the platform renting out their stuff, and we decided we need to make a proper website. So I hired someone locally to do a MVP. And back then, I didn't know it was an MVP. I just called it a very basic place where someone can query all the database of equipment and find it where it is and make an inquiry. Yeah, we did that in like 2 weeks, and then we launched it, and we had a lot of traction to the point where in somewhere in 2017, I think we opened our first physical collection point. Back then, I think we were fully distributed, and there wasn't a central place. But then we had some people asking us like for bigger orders, and then we need to collate from multiple owners in one location. So yeah, we did our first collection point, and then started working on the more spec'd out version of the website, where you have things like that people take for granted now. Login modules, invoicing, e-payments, and then we added in other verticals as well. So not just camera equipment, but now you could book like creative spaces, event logistics, and basically all the kind of related industries like media and events. That's the kind of folks you'll find using our platform. Today we have about 225 or more owners, maybe 250 by now, and done more than I think 15,000 transactions. So it's a small community, very niche market, and I don't think we are going to be raising funds because of the lack of scalability of this idea. But it sort of gave me a first understanding of how platforms work, and because of this endeavor as well, I stopped working so much with big companies on video projects, and I created a second company called Startup Media in 2016. The idea was to serve the startup market so that I can also get the opportunity to learn from them. And then I started working with a lot of accelerators and incubators. This process gave me a seat in the room, right? Like I had, instead of paying for the course, I just go there and get paid to film. So yeah, I did a lot of work with helping them work on their marketing, videos, photos, looking at pitch decks and so on. And yeah, that's also how I slowly got involved in the startup scene. I started to understand like how these kind of innovations, and including the company I was working on, as a platform in 2015, it was quite the nascent days of like Ubers and Airbnbs. So yeah, I just started learning more being in the same room as these people. And then I started a third company in Myanmar called Crossworks. So that is a remote hiring company. Initially, again, just to solve my own problem. I had some hiring needs at that point in time for video editors, for some people to handle the admin work and the marketing for J Rental Center. So I wanted to hire 3 people, and yeah, I think with developed markets like Singapore, talent is always a shortage, and Singapore's population is not very big, and our unemployment rate is consistently under 2%. So yeah, we as a small company always find it very financially straining and challenging to attract the best talent. So I was looking at a few markets, and I just thought Myanmar would be a very interesting place because they have a very good relationship with Singapore in terms of the people-to-people ties.
And also the
Singapore is
population of the consumers, I believe.
not so much as a market, because we were just
No.
looking at them from a human resource perspective, and to
Okay.
hire people to work remotely for our team. So yeah, the people-to-people relationship was a strong point, especially because Singapore is a big investor in Myanmar. So they see us as more benevolent than the Chinese money in some way, because the Chinese money usually comes with more strings attached. Um, in terms of the experience I had in the country, I had visited, I think, every country in Southeast Asia except Laos and Brunei by that point. And I think I saw something special about the people, and the kind of issue with the brain drain started to hit me because so many of their best and brightest talent have left the country long ago. Places like Thailand, Singapore, US, I think they have more than 3 million Myanmar diaspora, and that is all due to the 50 years of the military rule. And unfortunately, now I think we have sort of seen the country go back into this dark age where the military has done a coup 3 months ago, and we are still operating in terms of work that it goes on. And in fact, I feel like the work that we are doing there is even more important now, because if there are no good opportunities coming in, then people will be going out. So
Exactly.
in fact, it's pretty much an employer's market now, given that there have been a lot of displacement due to the coup, due to people on strike or companies that had to close. So yeah, I guess that was the third company I started. Then we also did a couple of stuff with co-working space and like a media company there. But yeah, these things have stopped because of COVID last year. And yeah, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to ask you about your experience as a founder or as an entrepreneur that comes from the Southeast Asian market. Usually, when we talk to people, they're like usually from US or Europe. So, if you can explain what the kind of like the culture is in that environment, in order to be an entrepreneur, in order to be a founder, in order to kind of like find a mentor in that kind of like marketplace, it would be great.
Sure. I think Singapore is sort of the exception in Southeast Asia. It's in my opinion, much more Western than Eastern. In a lot of things that we do, even the language that we speak, the kind of culture that we have, I think it's more closely in sync with American kind of Western democracy, idealism. Of course, the whole society is a bit more conservative, and you have this kind of older generation which is still around. But in terms of the young generation, I think we are sort of very westernized. The kind of average or norm in Southeast Asia will be really far away from what you'll find is a growing population in Singapore. And for myself personally, I think obviously when I had to drop out of school, I think that was the point where I received the most resistance. Then after that, starting a business didn't seem like such a big problem. Yeah, it's more like whether I'll be getting a uni degree, and whether I'll be going into a well-paying job or like working for a bank and things like that. I think there's still some expectations around, not just like from the family. I'm not speaking specifically about myself. I think my parents were very encouraging, at least after a few years, to support whatever I chose. But I think in general, there's still that idea that entrepreneurship is the less taken path, and it's comes with its level of risk as well. But yeah, I think things are changing a lot. We are seeing more and more support from schools, from governments, from the kind of ecosystem players that are even paying you to start your own company now, right? I think I would be so glad if someone paid me back then to start my own company, and
They're doing it right now
fund you and everything.
in Singapore.
Yeah, so the ecosystem in Singapore has matured a lot in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, if you can kind of like open it up for us and for the audience, like how is it like to be an entrepreneur, and what are the resources to start a business in Singapore these days?
I think first and foremost, you have to start with the climate, right, that you are in. So even disregarding any kind of investments or mentorship or programs or anything like that, Singapore as a country has been on the global map on with the likes of like Hong Kong and Switzerland as financial hubs, and also the kind of political stability and continuity and the policies that have been very business friendly. If you look at the rankings, consistently in the top 5 for business friendliness. So just because of these kind of factors, it's not just for startups. Even if you want to open a company producing like cars, I think we have started doing some manufacturing for cars recently as well. These are all pluses. Secondly, I think in terms of the access to the market, if the startup is looking at going into Southeast Asia, Singapore is a natural destination because it's straddled between like Malaysia, Indonesia, and the other kinds of countries. And just within 3 hours radius, you can get to every country in Southeast Asia.
Right.
So yeah, sorry, maybe 4 hours. I'm just making a point there that it's very central, and the air hub and the sea hub, the trade links are very strong. Specific to the startup industry, I think there has been a bit of like a rise and a fall of these programs that are available. Of course, like any kind of business cycle, you have some time where there wasn't anything at all. Like maybe in 2013 to 2014 or 15, there were very few kind of like accelerator programs, funding available for people to start their business. And then it sort of became very hot, coming up to 2015 and 16 and 17. And to the point where I think there were so many early stage accelerators in the country that there was more money than ideas. So yeah, a lot of them ended up like either redirecting their efforts to other areas, or just looking at a different scene altogether, or just closing down, right? And then obviously with the resurgence recently, I think people are looking at Singapore as a safe haven, and there are more and more government support coming out from different innovation related schemes where the government opens up like open innovation challenges and funds businesses along with VCs, provides the kind of funder founding through accelerator programs and other incubators. And even in the education sector, we work a lot with incubators that are within the institution. So they might be like part of the university or polytechnic, and they are already getting the students, to be immersed in this program, and they can even take time off their school or go overseas to do an internship. And these are all programs that I believe are very positive towards bringing more exposure towards this kind of opportunity to be an entrepreneur instead of just to be working for someone.
That's great. As a founder in the field of media, as you mentioned, what have been COVID impacting in this industry, in your point of view, and as someone who's been impacted?
It's been very severe, I would say. So I think the last 1.5 years, or 1 year or so, was the worst year for our platform. The traffic grinded to a halt when Singapore government announced a circuit breaker, which is the equivalent of a lockdown. And people couldn't be shooting anything, right? So whether it's indoors or outdoors, as long as it's a shooting activity, unless it's for the national broadcaster, right, or you got a whitelist from the regulator, you will be not allowed to proceed. And therefore, naturally, people don't have any requirement for equipment. People don't have any requirement for production people like myself or like my staff. So we were hit with a very strong, I would say, impact, the whole industry across the board. And also, I think that is what sort of made me think about looking at the other side of the startup ecosystem, right? Which is to start doing some
Being
investment,
innovative.
yeah, and start making myself kind of like part of the solution in general, because COVID also represented a sea change in terms of people's adoption to digital technology, right? It was like the
Exactly.
chief technology officer of so many companies, so many governments. All of a sudden, 5 years of progress was done in like 1 month, for like the ministries of education, with e-learning, with the big companies, adopting remote working. So yeah, I think that kind of landmark event was also personally something that asked me to, what was a sign to me that I needed to start diversifying and spending my interest and time looking at the landscape of innovation and how I can be part of it as well. Because I by that time I had spent about 2.5 years in Myanmar, and I think I was already in connection with some of the startup ecosystem in Myanmar. I had just joined Accelerating Asia, which is a venture accelerator as an LP. So yeah, I was seeing that there was a huge funding gap between the developed markets and big tech or fintech or blockchain or AI, this kind of very deep tech kind of sectors, where obviously funding is necessary and it's a very resource intensive research or area that needs funding. But also there was a huge lack of funding, in developing countries and in less developed population profiles. So even when you look at typical startup, when they want to target a segment of the population, they always go for the wealthy and affluent, because naturally these people have the purchasing power, the disposable income. So even if you're making a 5% improvement in their quality of life, you're actually going to be getting paid a lot more than improving the quality of life for someone without electricity, water, food, energy, and healthcare, right? And this is something that was fundamentally difficult for me to square, right? Because I sort of been quite well traveled by that point in time, and along the way I came across so many different communities and so many different cultures and people. The only thing that I can find is that we are all similar, we are all common and equal in value. Why are we spending so much more time and resources on just the top couple of percentile, whereas people are suffering the impacts of climate change, people are suffering from food shortage, water shortage, and energy shortage, healthcare, lack of access to healthcare, and so on. So yeah, that sort of got me thinking on, since I had so much more free time on my hand, given that
So
the
now, are
activities
you
were
investing? Are you
very
investing in
much
companies?
stalled.
Are you acting as an investor?
Yeah, so I obviously took the first step couple of years, even before 2019, having been watching startups on the side that yeah, I basically did a couple of syndicate deals where basically you are just joining with another investor or doing some of crowdfunding equity style drive to support companies that I felt were doing interesting work. And then in 2020, I also joined Accelerating Asia, invested in some of their portfolio companies, and did more syndicate work. Went around starting in November last year to South Africa and East Africa to understand the continent better. Before that, I have not stepped into the African continent yet. And that was supposed to be a 2 or 3 month trip for me before I head back to Myanmar to look at the remote hiring scene again. Because it's still something that I feel is something we really need to spend a lot of effort on, providing opportunities for these people. And yeah, that didn't happen because of the coup. So I extended the journey to Egypt, Dubai. I went to Pakistan before circling back to Egypt, because originally I'm supposed to be in Bangladesh now, but my flights was cancelled twice from Dubai due to the ongoing pandemic there, which I hope the situation does get better in the whole South Asia. Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, they've all had like second and third waves recently. So I do hope the situation improves there. But yeah, I'm continuing to look at the interesting startups from those countries, and I'm actually in the midst of pondering whether I should join a fund or do some kind of more full-time role with this venture and investment space, given that it's something that I really enjoy. I have a low threshold of boredom, if you have not figured that out by now. And getting to speak to founders from so many different industries doing so many interesting projects is something that I really enjoy.
One and the last question, since you are kind of like involved with the kind of like Middle Eastern ecosystem and the marketplace, what do you think the next trend would be in terms of investing, and what kind of technology trends we would be expecting to see from the Middle East and the areas that you're actually traveling to: Egypt, Dubai, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and how do you think that the founder's perspective is versus, for example, Silicon Valley and even Europe?
I'm not an expert in the Middle East. The only country I visited is Israel and Dubai. So
Yeah,
I would say that
a holistic view.
yeah, my interest is generally in Asia and Africa. I think already Asia accounts for like 60% of the world's population, and Africa will be the fastest growing region
Mhm.
by 2050. Yeah, by 2050. And I think in terms of how I see the ecosystem in general is that, you know, based on my first understanding that everyone is like equal, I would say that it makes a lot of sense for anyone to invest in things that will contribute to basic necessities or utilities, right? Like food, like water, electricity, healthcare. And I think these are areas that will grow in demand, even if AI takes off or space travel takes off or blockchain takes off. You know, you still need all those things. So those are very low tech and so-called uncool sectors that will still need a lot of investment and will drive a lot of returns definitely. So in the technology specific space, I'm seeing a bit of a trend towards decentralization. Yeah, you used to have a lot of big platforms like Facebook and Instagram for social media, and also people are sort of losing their trust, right, in these big platforms and even central banks. That's why crypto is picking up a lot. So yeah, I think decentralization is a big trend, whether it's like forming your own small circles or, you know, working on networks that do not rely on, you know, the internet, you know, they have a independent kind of bandwidth to interoperate with different IoT devices, you know. If there was a power issue with aging grid systems like places in Africa, right? And some of the um, national grids also have issues with collecting payments. So yeah, I think you will start to see a lot of decentralized grids and decentralized finance, decentralized social media, decentralized kind of world, right? And it's both a function of things getting smaller and people getting losing their trust in the big institutions, you know, because of all the transparency that social media has provided, and the internet has also given people a means to understand the mechanisms of, you know, how capitalism works, um,
And
to the
also
effect that there are people,
democratization,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
you mentioned Africa. Africa is actually a very fast country in terms of growing, growing country in terms of technology, and we
continent.
see exactly continent. Sorry, and we see that so many users, specifically in cryptocurrency, are very much interested in the field. Um, and how do you see the future of I mean Africa, as you are also very much interested in that area? And what kind of generation of entrepreneurs, or I would say technology, are we looking into specifically, for example, with because this continent, because the lack of infrastructure and internet is so bad there, and now with, for example, Tesla or SpaceX providing the remote kind of like the satellite Wi-Fi to the remote areas, right? I mean, we are it's unleashing maybe millions of entrepreneurs that are going to be having access to the internet. How do you see that future coming, and how fast would that be?
Unfortunately, I'm optimistic, but not too optimistic on that front, because you still have this huge funding gap. I think there was
Mhm.
a figure that came out somewhere a few weeks or months ago where the Singapore market has captured something like $4 to $5 billion of funding last year. Compared to the entire Africa, the continent of 1.2 billion people, they have made investments in total of like under $3 billion. Some estimates put it at 1.5 or 2.2, but that's quite ridiculous, right? Singapore, with a population of 5 million, has attracted about $4 to $5 billion in funding in 2020 compared to the entire African continent. So you have a huge way to go in terms of bridging that gap. And of course, you know, people register their companies in Singapore, they domicile it there because of tax reasons, because of neutral territory and ease of expansion, things like that. But you know, even if we were to discount all of that, the gap per capita is huge. So people are obviously getting more opportunities, no doubt. But I think they also need to be handed a fair deck of cards, right? When you are looking at someone who's growing up whether or not they have Wi-Fi or whether or not they have a computer. There are so many other factors like, do they have to feel hungry for a living, or do they have to get bad water? So there might be a genius who is dying at the age of 4 because he's not getting access to clean water and things like that. So you just have a lot more higher chance of success if you are in a key destination like a US or Silicon Valley or Dubai or Singapore than if you are growing up in a small village somewhere else. Although obviously your chances have gone up, but they're still quite far away in terms of the equal opportunity that everyone would theoretically hope to achieve, but few people are working towards that.
Great, thank you so much. Any closing remarks? Any comments?
Yeah, I think I'm just sort of very excited in general about the kind of positive change that technology can provide, not just for the top 1 or 2% or the top 10 or 20%, but for everyone in general. I'm not a believer in what they call trickle-down economics, right, where you just benefit the rich business owners and you are going to benefit everyone in some way. It works to a limited extent. I think you have to have vaccines created in high research and development rigor environments, and these things like the internet was obviously once a defense project in the US, right, and it sort of benefits everyone. But there has to be a balance between what kind of improvements we are making and how are we squaring that off with immediate needs and access to necessities. So one of the very iconic, obvious cases for me will be how, if we develop something that is super uh, kind of like big data driven analytics and AI, and we want them to be used for education, right? But then you are looking at a village that doesn't have power, not let alone internet. How are they going to benefit from this innovation unless the power internet first comes before we talk about using an AI teacher, for example, which is great. I mean, there are so many places where there's a shortage of teachers, but you sort of have to fix the first problem of how they're going to get shelter, water, food, and energy so that they can access your AI teacher. So I think sort of doesn't need to be one or the other, but I think it can be a parallel track, and I'm excited to see some people work on interesting solutions in that space.
Great, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Likewise, thanks a lot.